Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Allure of the Poor, sponsored by Dresita Wines. Today, yes, it is October. So, do you know what that means? That means it is one of my favorite times of the year, one of my favorite months. One, well, because I got married in October, but two, because it is Merlot Me month. And we are starting off Merlot Me month with an incredible winemaker, Michael Cood from Rutherford Hill. And I'm hoping I said your last name right now that I'm on live here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Laurie. Unfortunately, my surname is from the 13th century, so yes, you do say a little bit different, but that's fine. We say Code. But yeah, I'm happy with Code. I've been lived with that all my life, so I'm fine.
Well, code is not difficult. It's like Morse code or,
Secret
it's
code, right?
secret code. There you go. So it's all good. So welcome to Merlot Me month and
Thank you.
welcome to Exploring the Wine Glass.
Yeah, you had me at Merlot.
Yes, yes. And Merlot is a near and dear variety to me. I do love it. It has so many different expressions. And you know what? I'm an underdog lover. And Merlot is kind of scrappy, baby. It is scrapping. And when people know what to do with it, like you and Rutherford Hill, it is a dynamic and beautiful wine.
Thank you. Yeah, and obviously Patrice knows what to do with it too, right?
Ah, yes, they do. Yes, they do. So tell me, how did you find your way to wine?
Well, that's a great question. And it's kind of colorful as well, because I did a career test at school, and because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And in Australia, you're allowed to drink when you're 18 years old. So naturally, I toyed with all the ideas of being a vet and a pilot and all those fun degrees. But realistically, I have a family of accountants, and the oddball out in the family is my dad, who's an electrical engineer. So when financial math came at the top of the career course, top of the list as to what to do, and that number two was winemaking, and being a wine enthusiast like he still is, you could see, naturally with accountants, dollar signs come up in the eyes. For him, it was like wine bottles. You could just see it as like, yes, please. I've got too many sterile conversations around numbers, so how about we do something fun and let's do wine? And he was very supportive, right? He said, both your siblings changed at college. They changed what they wanted to do. So why don't you just go with it if that's what you'd like to try? And if you change, it's no big deal. So yeah, I drove into it mainly because my brother is an accountant, and he was going through his middle of the career kind of frame of mind because he's 11 years older than me. And yeah, he was like, man, unless you love numbers, this isn't for you, or it isn't for anybody. So I had some good mentors in my life at a very early stage saying, how about we go and have a look at a different career?
That's fantastic that you had that nurturing, that family support to do something that is outside the realm of your typical family base.
Right. And then my dad said, let's get a vineyard. I'll sit at the top. We've got the accountants covered over here, and then you can make the wine over there, and I can just watch over the top of my retirement fund. But it never
And reap
happened.
the
Now we're in
benefits.
different corners, right?
Right, right. That is fantastic. And by the way, my dad was an electrician, so the electrical is really near and dear. So I did a little snooping around for you, and you are by far like not at all a newbie, man. You have got like 21 harvests under your belt, 4 countries. Like you have gotten around, done it all, seen it all. How does that happen? And what did you take away? How do these different countries vary from each other?
Yeah, well, when I was doing my degree, I worked at a bottle shop, and I had the most amazing mentor show me the world of wine and really get me hooked. And you can only stand at a bottle shop so many hours a day and wonder what all those wines taste like, especially with, ironically, the vintage that I really wanted to try was an 89 Petrus. And it was at the time $3,300 and Australian dollars, which nowadays is probably a steal. So yeah, I looked at all the worlds of the wines of the world, and in Australia we basically have a 50% tax on wine. So all the wines in the cabinet were just out of this world expensive. I saw the first growth Bordeaux's, I saw the Grand Cru Burgundies, I saw Barolos. There was a lot of the world of the wine to see, and obviously I can see Barossa and all that, but I learned very quickly that you can't tell the story of wine, or you can't figure out what winemakers do until you see it and feel it. So for me, you got to get on a plane, you got to get your hands dirty, and most importantly, you got to have an open mind. You get taught things at school, and books have numbers and ways of doing things, but they try to make it simple. But until you see it and feel it, there's nothing like it. So for me, yes, I've chased the harvest around the world, but I've also, unfortunately for my wife, on our honeymoon, we had a 5-week honeymoon, and I took her to every region I worked at and every region that I kind of wanted to go to. So we did Switzerland, we did Austria. The world of wine generally is the top of the list when it comes to, all right, we're going to travel. What wineries can we go to? So yeah.
I don't know. You said unfortunately. I would be like, yeah, this is like the best honeymoon ever looking at all these wine things.
Right. Well, it doesn't tend to evolve around beaches. Wineries and wine regions, but food and wine's not a bad way to go, right?
Not at all. So, and you have experience, you worked at a premier crew. Like, how do you get that gig? Shut down or go? How? Like, and what is that like?
Well, I listened to a lot of motivational things when I was younger, and one of the things I got left with was you got to dream big, and if you don't dream big enough, you're never gonna be disappointed. So one night when I was sitting at university, I said, "Look, I love Cabernet, and I really want to go to Bordeaux, and I'm sick of looking at the bottles and not tasting them in the cabinet." And sure enough, I emailed every single first growth, second growth, third growth, fourth growth, fifth growth in Bordeaux in one night. I emailed them all, tried to make it all different. I spent about 9 hours just crafting emails, trying my best. My French was non-existent, so I had to start with English, and then I just kept persisting and persisting because this is where I wanted to go. You don't learn how to make Bordeaux wines with sitting in Australia. So yeah, to Bordeaux, here we come, and you guys are just going to figure out where I'm going to go because I'm coming.
I love it. I absolutely love it. So from there, you come to the United States and you find your way to Rutherford Hill. So how do you get to Rutherford Hill? I mean, emails there too?
Well, here it's a little bit different. So the Margaux winemaker, Philippe Ascol, was at Inglenook. He moved there in 2012, if I'm correct. And I was sitting in Australia, just recently married, and the US is the largest wine consuming country in the world, and the Napa Valley is pretty spectacular. So I actually came to see him on my honeymoon, which was in 2014. And I said, "Hey, look, you've come here. What's it like? Leaving Margaux is a big step, right?" And Francis Ford Coppola did a great job in luring him out. And I said, who should I talk to? And he said, "Actually, I've got a vacancy. So send me your resume when you get home." And then sure enough, 6 months later, I was here. But then Margaux was going through a little bit of a change because Paul Pontilia, who was the co-owner with Corinne Menzenopoulos, he sadly got bone cancer. And, with Paul going and Philippe leaving in the space of 2 years, they were losing 50 years of winemaking. So the writing was on the wall that he was going to go back. Gallo was really pursuing me for the new product development role, which was amazing. And so with Philippe leaving, I was like, "You're the whole reason I came here." But most importantly to me, I've got a wine business degree. So I know that I need to know the customers. And with Gallo's new product development, I knew I was going to see the entire US market and how people think about wine. Because the US consumer is very different in my mind. There's some amazing palates and amazing wines that I've never seen anywhere else here. So once I got that opportunity, and with Philippe leaving, I was like, all right, I'm going to go to Gallo, and I've got to learn about the consumer, because I think that's going to set me on a great trajectory in terms of learning about the world of wine, but then with a consumer focus, because it can't all be hobby, sadly. You have to know how to make great wine that makes people happy at every price point, and that was a great opportunity. I was always friends with Richie at Rombauer. Through the time I met him when I was at Inglenook, and at Gallo, we always admired the Rombauer brand. And well, the recent acquisition proves how much they liked him.
Right.
So we used to joke about how good Rombauer was and how I was really struggling to replicate a similar kind of wine style. And so there was some friendly banter going on there. And then in the end, they bought the Sierra Foothills facility, and he said, "You want to come run that for me?" And initially, I was pretty happy at Gallo because it was such a cool opportunity. I've been with the team for a while, and new products is exciting. You see so many different segments, and you got to make different wines from all over the state. Pretty cool opportunity. And eventually, he came to me the second time. He was like, "I'm not going to ask again." So, all right, let's go. So we went out to the foothills. We did that for 2 years, and that's just at the start of the pandemic. Wife was able to work from home, so that was a no-brainer. Got to work with Zen and run a site, so that was awesome. And then, naturally, everybody had to come back to the office. My wife's looking at a 3-hour commute down to Oakland because she works at Kaiser. So the opportunity to come and lead a team here at Rutherford Hill, reinvigorate a 50-year-old brand that has an amazing tenure, amazing facility. Well, you got to be part of that, right? You can build brands, but to reinvigorate a brand and bring it back to what it is good at is amazing. And then most importantly, to be Merlot centric. I think that's really cool and unique. They've had the flag in the ground for 50 years that Merlot is what we do. And then seeing the fruit sourcing that we have. And if you come to the tasting room, we've got an amazing assortment of different wines now. We've got sub-AVA wines of just Merlot, which I think is very unique for Napa Valley. So A, I got to talk about the diversity of Merlot, and B, I got to see what diversity Napa has to offer. And I'm pretty excited because I think we're going to give Bordeaux a run for its money this time.
All right. And talking about that facility, for those who are just listening on the podcast, they are missing out because you are sitting in the cave. And
Right.
so, is this a private cave? If people come and visit, can they get in there and see what's going on down there?
Yeah, so we started digging the caves in the mid 1990s. So we have 4/5 of a mile of working caves, but then we do have this little cave that I'm sitting in right now, and it's the cave dining room. So we have for our exclusive members for our wine club, we do host events in here. We do host small events for our members in here. And it's a really nice, intimate experience, and with no AC, and yeah, it's pretty wild that somebody had the vision to put this in, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I think there's something very mystical, romantic, incredible just being in a cave and tasting the wine. I think it adds to the experience like enormously, but it just kind of makes it feel like it's the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the other thing I love about here is that this beautiful dining room is hidden away around a corner. And as you walk in, you're just automatically wowed because it's such a transformation, and the smells are fantastic. And you're here for wine and an experience. So most definitely.
So Rutherford Hill, tell us a little bit about the history of the winery itself.
Yeah, so I think in today's modern world, we are really fortunate because our winery kind of blends into the hill. We were started in 1972, and in 1974, we had Joseph Phelps, small little guy who made some amazing wines back in the day. And fortunately enough, I've had some of his wines recently and just floored. They're 50 years old and just doing amazing. But more importantly, he had the vision to hire a Swiss architect, and we basically look like a Swiss chalet. If you have that kind of mindset, and you'll see it just blends beautifully into the hill. We got all these extensive caves. So with a world tenured kind of history, we've been really lucky. So the Talados are the current owners, and they bought it in '96 from the Jaeger family or conglomerate. There was a consortium, and the family used to supply a lot of Rutherford Hill back in the day to the broad market. and the opportunity came to buy the facility, and they took it with open arms. And yeah, we've been focused on quality rather than quantity, because initially it was the quantity was way too high. So the family decided that let's bring this back into a quality house, and yeah, we've been doing that ever since. So we used to do about 40,000 cases of Merlot, and now we're back down to 15. So yeah, it's been really great to focus on Merlot and quality Merlot. Yeah, as we look forward to the future.
And what do you think? Well, before we get into that. So Rutherford Hill, it's in Rutherford. Is that
Yep,
where the winery is?
right
And
above
so
Auberge de Soleil.
I would say that again.
So Auberge de Soleil is our neighbor, and we're just on top of the hill above them. So we've got, hopefully in the future, we'll have a view that'll rival them. So I'm excited for that redevelopment that's coming in.
Awesome. And so tell me about this Rutherford dust. Is it true?
Yes.
Is it not true? What do we think?
Definitely. You know, when you see any Rutherford wines out in the market, you can have a blind tasting, and you definitely see that kind of characteristic. And I know dust doesn't sound enticing, but there's definitely that kind of. I think as people, we kind of assimilate it just to make it a little bit more simplistic. But there's definitely that unique aroma that Rutherford has to offer. And for me, it kind of rivals what you would see in the Margaux appellation. You know, if you go to Saint Julien, you get more chocolatey. Well, that's kind of what you see in similar kind of characteristic in Calistoga. So yeah, for me, Margaux and Rutherford have some similarities with that really nice dusty, earthy character.
I had been to a master class on the wines of Macedonia. And
Nice.
it was an incredible experience, but every single wine had something that I was relating to a similar concept as Rutherford Dust. It had that same, every wine had this same unique characteristic. And at the end of the master class, I went up to the Somm who was running the class, and I started talking to him. I'm like, you know what these remind me of? The concept of Rutherford Dust. Like you can always tell a Rutherford wine because of the Rutherford dust. And these wines all have that same similar thing. And we geeked out for quite some time. He opened another bottle. We sat down, we were drinking. It was so I completely agree. There is something about Rutherford that gives out that same characteristic bottle after bottle.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. And so tell us about um, the the passion that you and Rutherford Hill has for Merlot.
Yeah. Well, for me, I've really taken a lot out of my time in France. You know, I spent time in the Rhone as well as in Bordeaux, and then under further tutelage from Philippe at Inglenook. So for me, every place and every parcel has its own unique personality. And as a winemaking team, I think our job is just to try and bring that personality out. I don't want to mask it. I don't want to do anything. And I sweat the detail. So, you know, the first thing I did when I got here, we had about 100 different lots. I went through every single one, had them all looked at all of them. And then when we started to, you know, trying to grade the wines and the different blocks, I got a feel for those. And then on all the blocks, I started to focus on what each Cooper did. And my poor assistant winemaker, he was really kind of wined out, I guess is the right word. But I'm like, we got to get this right, because certain barrels just don't do it justice, and others do a great job, and we need to figure that out. The accountants hate it because they're like, why do you need 12 different Coopers? I'm like, well, I need 3 Coopers for this one, 2 for that one, and 3 for that one. And, you know, but that to me is important because, you know, if you have the wrong barrel, it can make all the difference, and it's easy to show you, but it's not easy to tell you. You know, words mean one thing, but until you taste it, you wouldn't see it. So I've been fortunate with that, and I really wanted to sweat the detail. And I think with that, not only do you see the wine's personality, but you see my passion and my personality coming through, and that I want that to be every time you stick your nose in there and you catch on to the Rutherford dust, you know, you want that mysteriousness to continue. It's like, what else do I smell in there? And then every time you smell, you want to see something different. And to me, that's what wine is. And if you're not passionate about it, this is not the right game.
And so when you came in, did you basically start with zero in terms of knowledge of the Rutherford Hill Merlot? And did you start your own spreadsheets? You started that whole thing? So, or did they give you, well, this is what we've done in the past?
Yeah, I must say, I've been very fortunate with the family. The Tolado family were nothing short of supportive. When I first came in here, for me, the most important thing when it comes to starting at a winery, and I learned this from my mentor that I have in the Rhone Valley. He's now with Chateau de Nelise in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. He was at Chabolet when I was there. And for me, the most important thing that he taught me was when you go to a winery, if they have a vision for where they want the winery to go and where the wines want to be, meeting that expectation is near impossible. And so if you want a winemaker to make a wine that you want, that is difficult to articulate and understand, then you're going to constantly be fighting uphill. And so the thing is, if you want me to take this winery to where I think it can go, it's much easier to hit those goals and expectations. And you can take people on the journey because you're explaining what you're trying to do. And, you can go to the critics and say, this is why I did this to achieve this. So for me, the family was like, hey, we just want Rutherford Merlot, Rutherford Hills Merlot to be one of the best. You've got all the training. I'm not here to tell you what to do. So you go do it and we'll help you do it. But you take this winery to where you think it needs to go. And that to me is a testament to how good this family is in terms of commitment to making great wine and putting their name behind a brand that they believe in. So yeah.
That, and I agree, that's the way to go. Because I mean, you see it in, to take it out of wine, you see it in sports all the time. If you have an owner, my husband is a Redskins, Commanders, whatever team name they are now, right? And Dan Snyder, the owner, was the biggest detriment because all he wanted to do was what he wanted. And he didn't know football. He didn't know, like, he didn't
Right.
understand, he was basically strapping the hands of the coach and the team and everything else because they had a different vision than what he had. So I think you're absolutely right that, they're hiring you for your specialty, for your knowledge to allow you to bring it to your vision.
Yeah.
Mm. So we're going to start off with the tasting of the Napa Valley Merlot. So this is, what vintage is this?
21.
21. Okay. So tell us about this wine. Oh, there's the, yeah, 21. Tell us about this wine. And before I do that, it never shows up on camera, and those listening aren't going to have any, too bad, people listening, you're missing out because this is beautiful color. I mean, this is beautiful ruby, nice medium. I always like put my fingers behind it, and it's like beauty in a glass. So tell us about this wine while I get to start to enjoy it.
Yeah, so I think one of the most important things when I thought, one of the biggest opportunities I thought that Rutherford Hill had in the past, we used to put a little bit of Cabernet in there. When I say a little bit, we used to put a lot of it in there. And, we're always a Merlot house. And then one of the things we wanted to come out the gate with the 21s and with me coming on board was the opportunity to put a Cabernet in the glass. So I thought, well, isn't it easiest for Merlot to do Merlot and Cab to do Cab? So I originally wanted to be 100% Merlot. In the end, I got stuck in my own head and trying to chase perfection. I ended up with 97% Merlot and 3% Cabernet Franc.
That's pretty strong Merlot.
Yeah. So I mean, like if you got to chase the right bank, you might as well give it a go, and you got to put a little bit of Franc in there. But also, I think they figured it out, right? So Cabernet Franc brings some really nice freshness in there and just adds a little bit on the back end that I really like. And for me, a wine like this Merlot should be soft, approachable, should be a really nice plum and spice, and should just clean out well. And for me, a great bottle of wine is one where you look at it and you go, where did it go? Oh, and hey, did you take an extra glass? Where's my other half, right? So to me, that's kind of what I want to do. And I think Merlot, if you have a Merlot and a Cab in a glass next to each other, there should be no ambiguity. It should be like, that's definitely Merlot and that's definitely Cab. And I think when you put Cabernet Sauvignon in there, I find it just muddles the nose a little bit and keeps you like, is that cab? Maybe I got that wrong. Or for me, I definitely wanted Merlot to do Merlot and do it well. So I'm really happy with what we have here for the 21 vintage.
It's magnificent. It is light, and that's a compliment. It is light on the palate, but filled with flavors and aromatics and spot on. I agree. To me, when I think Merlot, I think plum or a little bit of that darker fruit, but still bright. Not sometimes it can, the fruit isn't vibrant, and this is nice and vibrant, and it has some beautiful spice on the back end of it, and on the palate, like I said, it's a lighter version. It's not a full body Merlot, which is what it should be, and the finish just lingers.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what I wanted. I really want that nice long finish. But it leaves a pleasant taste in your mouth. And I didn't want to, for me, Merlot is a thinner skin variety and shouldn't be anything like Petite Syrah, shouldn't be dark and, over the top. Like, let's
Thank
keep
you.
that to Cabernet.
Yeah, and it is the tannins and the acid there's tannins there. Now I just poured into this right before we started. So the tannins are there, but they are enveloped into those flavors, and the acid is magnificent. Like it makes you kind of salivate to take another glass, which brings us to the hey, where did that extra glass disappear to, right?
No, that's awesome. I think acidity used right is really important to get that salivation happening and makes you go for that second glass for sure. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Okay. And so let's get a little geeky on this one. I want to get geekier on when we get into the designated wines. But what do you look for in a Merlot when it comes time to harvest?
The most important thing to me is it's got to taste great. The numbers this year, like so currently, 23 has been quite a challenging year. We've had a really long, slow ripening period, which has been amazing. And I think in the really hot years, the sugar goes up really high, which means you're going to get high alcohol, but that physiological maturity is really important. So you can have all the great numbers you want, but those are numbers, and I'll leave that to the accountants. And my job is to go what tastes good. So for me, the most important thing is to make sure Merlot is not leafy and green. I really don't like that in a wine. Or in Merlot, I really don't like that at all. You can have a little bit of dried herb, but even that's a little bit much for me. I prefer it to be a real undertone. And I don't want anybody to ever lead that my Merlot's green.
It
But
is
most
not.
importantly, I don't want it to be jammy either. I want it just to have that really nice fruit balance and get that exposure. So for me, it's about picking the grapes at the right time, and then more importantly, it's getting that fermentation right. You can extract everything out of it, and I'm not sure that that's necessarily what you want to do with Merlot. So yeah, it's getting that really nice balance and making sure that you don't pull out the worst of it, but pull out absolutely all the best you can.
And in terms of that extraction, because Merlot can very easily, in my opinion, be overly extracted, are you cold soaking? Are you pressing quickly? What is your thought process and how you are processing this wine?
That's a really great question. I kind of change a lot. So I do like the cold soak. Science says to not do it as much, but reality says that it actually works quite well. I find it's really good at helping the fermentation and the decomposition. Decomposition isn't a great word, but kind of like the breakdown of the skins, and they're helping release a lot of those polysaccharides and a lot of those tannin structures in there. So I think combining that with some really good fermentation techniques. So, not pumping it over too much. I taste it daily. I always have my assistant winemaker attached to my hip, and like I use him as a sounding board. Everybody's got different taste thresholds, and everybody sees something different. So I've come to learn his palate, and I think he's come to learn mine. And I get stuck up on some things. I really don't like green, and I really don't like harsh tannins. And he notices bitterness a little bit better than me. And like, so we kind of use each other as great sounding boards. So that has been awesome in terms of some blocks we do pump over more and some blocks we don't. And then I think getting the right type of barrels in has helped. So some blocks can handle a little bit more new oak and some definitely can't. So, it's just every time just pulling some levers up and pulling some levers down and then just kind of rolling with the punches. But that's what makes harvest fantastic, because this year is so different to last year and different to the year before. But I'm so grateful for all the time I've spent in different countries and different regions and different winemakers with different thinking, because I feel like I've got a really good idea of what to do no matter what the climate throws at me.
And so Rutherford Hill has actually they claim that they are pioneers in Merlot. So how do you think Rutherford Hill blazed the trail for Merlot?
Well, the winery started in 72, came out the gate in 74 with Merlot, originally started as a white house. And I don't think really that there were many people going in hard with Merlot. Obviously, there weren't many people in Napa Valley then, really. Getting in before the tasting in Paris and Napa Valley kind of getting on the map. So to come out before then with some Merlot, I think is a pretty good testament. And then also just sticking by it the entire time. We went a little sideways, I suppose some say, for a little time, but I think that sideways is straightening up again. So, I think it's exciting that we've stayed true to what we're good at.
And this Merlot that we tasted, the Napa Valley Merlot, this is nationally distributed. So people can find this everywhere.
Hopefully, yeah. And if not, we can definitely find it at the winery.
There you go. So if they come to the winery, though, man, they are going to be treated to some seriously specific Merlot. So you also make, and I don't know if you make others, but I have on hand Oak Knoll District, Stags Leap District, and Carneros
Yep.
Merlot. So are there other Merlots also, or is this your
So this was our current offering for vintage 21 and vintage 22. We're probably going to add a Rutherford Merlot in there. We have our estate vineyard just down the hill, and we put our Merlot in a few years ago. So that'll start coming online as well. This will be the first vintage that we do of it. And so, yeah, unfortunately, you're going to have to wait another 2 years, but we'll get there.
Okay. And you said you have a state, so these wines are sourced?
That's correct, except the Chimney Rock Stags Leap District Merlot.
Okay.
Chimney Rock is a sister winery of ours, and we get 10 tons from them, so we're very fortunate with that. I was really lucky when we got here. As I say, the family was very supportive. So I asked if we can do everybody kind of has different stories of Cabernet, but nobody really talks about the diversity of Merlot, and having the opportunity to talk about that diversity was huge. So the Oak Knoll district comes from a Beckstoffer vineyard. We'd been sourcing fruit from them, and that had been going into the Napa Valley Merlot. And then the Carneros as well, we'd been sourcing from them, and that was also going to the Napa Valley Merlot. They still do most of the fruit, but I pick the eyes out of it, and we use the best of that for our DTC wines, which are only 400 cases. But yeah, those are pretty fun wines to work with and fun parcels. But the beauty is that you get to see different soils, different aspects, and obviously different conditions. Carneros is LIFO, so last in, first out in terms of heat. So it's got the longest ripening out of everybody.
Okay.
And in a cool year like this year, it's going to be challenging, but it'll be fun. But in a good year like last year, when I say last year, vintage 22, the depth and concentration is fantastic. I mean, you still see it in 21, but I'm excited for 22 as well.
So let's break these wines down a bit. So the Oak Knoll district, how would you describe the vineyard site at this, where you're getting this fruit from?
Yeah, so the whole idea, what I wanted to do in the tasting room was talk to people about the Napa Valley Merlot. And then I wanted to have that. So I wanted to have full glasses. You got Napa Valley Merlot, which comes from all over Napa Valley, and nothing too specific in terms of, what we just wanted to make great Merlot. The Oak Knoll and Stags Leap, basically, they're the kind of closest I could get to being a very similar latitude. So in terms of Napa Valley, so Oak Knoll is on the western foothills. So it gets all the mornings. It gets all the morning sun, and then the stag's leap is on the eastern foothills, and it gets all the afternoon sun. So the idea, or what I tried to do there, was to show people what morning exposure does versus afternoon. And I think the wines talk to themselves. You know, when you have them in the glass next to each other, the oak knoll is the tannins are a lot softer and a lot longer. It's less kind of that dark red fruit, and you know, the palette is just so much more elegant and longer and just really enticing. And then the Stag's Leap has what I would call Stag's Leap through and through. You know, you've got those really nice cues of really dark upfront red fruit. You've got that really nice olive leaf in there, and that hallmark mid-palate weight that is just fantastic. But it's a little bit shorter than the oak knoll. So, you know, when people taste the two wines next to each other, it's like, wow, that's really cool what morning exposure and what afternoon exposure can do, and the difference it can make. And then after you've got east and west exposure, I've got the most southern exposure. So I think the Napa Valley Merlot is a good composition of what North Valley and South Valley and East Valley and West Valley can do. But the Carneros, I think, is a unique beast in terms of it's the most southern part of the valley. It's right on top of the bay, and just showing you what long, slow ripening can do and the impact on color. So, you know, those three glasses should be distinctively different. And I think anybody who comes in and wants to see what Merlot can be in different regions would get excited with that.
So the fact that Merlot is an offspring of Cabernet Franc, do we have issues, especially in that Carneros region, right? Being so close to the bay, of pyrazines? Do we need to
That's a
concern
great
ourselves with
question.
that?
I think the Beckstoffer team down there, Jim Lewis is the vineyard manager down there. If you think I know detail, that guy knows way more detail than me. He sweats the minutia on the way he prunes it. I said to him, you know, you go down there and there's about 5 different iterations of Merlot and the way the canopy is hung. He's like, this clone here needs to be in a Z shape. You know, if you're looking down at the vine, it needs to be in a Z shape. It needs to be a split cordon. Needs to be 3 buds this side, 3 buds that side, and then this clone here needs to be 5 buds wide, and it needs to be in a perfect VSP, and then this one needs to do that, and this one needs to do that. And that guy knows his stuff, and he knows how to make sure that he gives us the grapes we want, and he's so on it. And I mean, that guy has been doing it for 30 plus years, and he is super passionate about Merlot and how to do it right. So I can assure you we won't have problems with pyrazines in there for some time.
And what about the soils within each of these districts?
Yeah, I think those are dramatically different as well. You know, the Carneros is very sandy soil and pretty shallow. So those can get stressed relatively quickly. And I think Jim knows exactly how to manage that really well. As you go further up valley, it tends to get a little bit more fertile, a little bit richer and a little bit heavier. So, you know, Stag's Leap being on the foothills of the east side tends to have a little bit more of that kind of Atlas Peak, harder, more kind of iron-rich kind of soils. But the Oak Knoll side is probably a little bit more heavier, very subtly. But it's probably got a little bit less of that kind of iron in there. And it's on yellow loam. Yellow loam is kind of like a black cracking kind of clay, but you know, the soil's just a little bit heavier there and deeper than it would be in Stag's Leap.
And do you have, I know I hate when people ask this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. We're going to go by expressions.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite expression of Merlot?
Yeah, anything or any wine that somebody wants to share that they're passionate about. The whole reason I get into wine, and I get all the time, is like, what do you love about wine? I love it when people are passionate about something, because politics divides people, but very rarely do you see a very intimate side of somebody when they're passionate about something. And for me, when people have a glass of wine in their hand, no matter what anything that any biases or anything you have, wine just is like, it's unique to you because your palate is different to everybody. Everybody's got different
Absolutely.
thresholds. But when I see people's eyes light up and their like heart comes out about you know what, I really love Carneros. It's deep, rich, and delicious, and I just love the density. And then the next person goes, you know what, that oak knoll just crushed it for me. It's just so long and soft and velvety, and like I don't need all that depth and concentration. I like this. And you can just see people have a healthy discussion, and everybody kind of gets on like, you know what, yeah, that's great, but nobody kind of goes, no, you're wrong, or blah 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 blah. It's You see very intimate, passionate sides of people, and I would love. I've had a few distributors come out, and you generally see people bat for their own wine, but nobody actually says no, you're wrong or whatever. I'm like, no, that's really cool, and see different perspectives. People tend to open up a little bit more, and I love that about wine. And I'm very happy when I see these Merlots, the people getting divided. You know what? I really love this and I love that. And I think that's awesome. So for me, being able to provide that opportunity is the most important thing to me.
The contrast between the three. So just for people who are listening or watching, what's the distance approximately between the Oak Knoll district, the Stags Leap district, and Carneros? Like,
The districts themselves, well, they border each other really, the Stag's Leap and the Oak Knoll, but the vineyards are basically on complete opposite sides of the valley. And I try to get something. I think telling the story is a little bit easier when one is legitimately on the foothills of one side and the other one's legitimately on the foothills of the other. So they're the furthest they could be apart, which is great. But yeah, Carneros is probably, I don't know, as the crow flies, no more than 20 miles away. But the thing is, the way the sea fog comes in and the San Pablo Bay and the effect it has, it's so dramatically pronounced in Carneros because obviously the sea fog goes up the valley, and then you've got all that heat trapped in Calistoga. So you kind of always, you have that diurnal shift, but it's probably more dramatic in Carneros than anywhere else.
if you could design the perfect vineyard site, you don't need to say which district or whatever, but the perfect for district, the perfect soil type, perfect location, vineyards, directions, all of that. If you could design the perfect one for Merlot, can you do that? What would it be like?
I think that's that's a loaded question. That's going to get me in some trouble. I like to think that Carneros, if you could, I would still do a blend of the region because I think there's things that I like in all of them. So I'm going to be a politician and sit on the fence, and that I would love to straddle some regions. So I think Carneros, doing a Bordeaux blend out of Carneros and further up valley, I think has its merits. But maybe that's the artist side of me is like there's too many options to commit to one that there's multiple ways it could go and multiple times of the year. So yeah, maybe for this question, I'll say Carneros is probably the most intriguing for me because it's the most challenging. Like in a good year, it's fantastic, and in a bad year, winemakers got to earn their money.
And so in Paso, this vintage, particularly 2023, we had such a long flowering period because of the climate and all of that, which causes some issues there. Did you see that same problem, that same climactic influence by you?
Definitely. I would love to say personally that was the best spring I've had for a long, long time. It just lingered and lingered. The temperatures were amazing. But yeah, Verasion normally is 4 days, and it was 4 weeks for us, even in the hottest areas. And I think in Carneros it probably pushed on to, I think it just finished last week. So yeah, it is incredibly late year, and I think that's awesome. Because you've never seen it before. So hopefully now, when you teach the next generation of winemakers, I can be that person that goes, I remember back in my day.
And that goes back to what you were saying at the very beginning of, there's book knowledge, but then there's hands-on, and that's why you went to do hands-on, because there's not any way a book can teach what you're going to have to do this vintage to deal is not the right word, but to still get these beautiful expressions out of these wines, knowing what that climate was previously.
Right. It's funny you bring that up. My mind jumped automatically back to Rombauer. My first vintage there was in 2020, and the fires were down here in Napa. But up there, it was very different. And I remember talking to Richie, and I said to him, I was like, can you imagine being at school with these numbers? We had a wine. So normally what happens as grapes ripen, the pH goes up and the TA comes down. The pH and the sugar tend to go up, and then the acid, or we call it TA, so total acidity, tends to decline. And in 2020 up there, I had never seen numbers like this before. We had a wine or we had juice that came in, and the normally you pick grapes at about 3.7, 3.8% pH, but normally you have a TA of about 3 or 4. So we had a wine that had or we had a juice that had a pH of 4.1 and a TA of 7, or total acidity of 7. So just to give you perspective, most of the wines that you tend to see on the shelf have a pH of 3.6 to 3.8, and then a TA of 6, but normally we have to add acid to that. And from a theoretical side and from a textbook perspective, you wouldn't add acid to that, but you need to add acid to bring the pH down so that the wine is more microbially stable and sound. And so we joked, I was like, can you imagine getting that in an exam? And you've been taught your whole life that, all right, well, you'll have a pH of 4, your acid will be 2. So, how much acid would you add? And you basically add 1 gram of acid brings the pH down 0.1. So you would go, okay, I'm going to add 5 grams of acid, and that's going to be where I want it to be. But when your acid is already at 7 where you want it to be, but your pH isn't, what do you do? And so we joked about that. It's like, they don't teach you that at school, and you know that you've just got to do something about this. So yeah, it was fun.
Absolutely, that is true. That's it. Book knowledge can only take you so far.
Right.
Now, if people want to learn more about Merlot and remember things in this Merlot Me month, what are like maybe 3 facts about Merlot that you want people to say, yes, this is what I need to remember about Merlot?
For me, Merlot is that really happy medium between Pinot and Cab, and it should be bringing the 2 drinkers together. So Merlot should be soft, easy drinking, should be really nice plum, dark cherry. It should have some really nice spice. And I think most importantly, Merlot is coming back. It went on hiatus for a little while, and I think we got rid of some bad Merlots out there, which has been amazing, because I think Merlot, I do love people that say, oh, I really don't like Merlot, but Saint Emilion and Pomerol on my jam. And you're like, well, that's mainly Merlot, so that's great news. So I think the rest of the world just needed to figure out how to make great Merlot like Pomerol and Saint Emilion have done for so long. So I love it that it's coming back and people are getting reinvigorated around it.
And with Rutherford Hill being completely dedicated to Merlot, you have like an oddball situation, right? You have something that really is not very common and very, obviously, like, I mean, not seen frequently. You actually have a rosé of Merlot. So
Yeah.
tell us about this rosé, because this is I have not tasted it, but I'm gonna go. This is not a wimpy rosé.
No. I was really lucky here. Normally, a lot of rosés, particularly in Australia, tend to be made with Saignée, which means you're taking the juice off the skins. We whole cluster press these grapes of Merlot, which means that we harvest it and we focus on the whole idea is to make great Merlot. Normally with Saignée, you're trying to make great red wine, and then you make the Saignée or the runoff juice into rosé, which doesn't tend to work out very well. So to have your eyes on the prize in terms of making rosé straight out the gate is pretty great, because you've got to have a different focus on what you're trying to do. So my time in the Rhone, which is not far from Provence, was pretty great in terms of just talking to some of the winemakers there and what they do. Yes, they got different varieties, but in terms of managing what you taste versus what you would make for red wine is very important. And then how to treat that when you get into the winery is really important. So we do the 100% Merlot in there. We do a little bit of old barrel fermentation, which I think is really important for mouthfeel. And for me, the most important thing is having a rosé that actually has a little bit of follow through. For me, mouthfeel's king, or it's the most important thing. If it dies away too quickly and then people aren't wondering where the bottle went, they wonder, it's like, oh, I've got half a bottle to go through. That's not what I want to do. I want to make a wine that leaves you going back for more and more. So yeah.
And the thing with talking about that Saunier, what you were saying is when you do a Saunier, like you said, your goal really is that red wine.
Yep.
And the byproduct basically is a rosé. So when you're focusing in on this rosé, if we can take it back to geekiness a bit and talking about when you're choosing to harvest it and what you're looking for, when about how much earlier are you picking this Merlot than for the rosé?
Yeah, so probably about 2 to 3 weeks earlier than we would for our regular Merlot. We focus a lot more on, I'm less worried about green in there. I'm more focused on more like strawberry and, I'm less worried about the seed tannins because I'm not going to press it too hard. And so, yeah, it's about 2 or 3 weeks before.
And approximately how much of this rosé do you make?
We make about 1,000 gallons, which tends to be around 400 cases. We like to release that in spring, so you know, make it our Porsche pounder when it's really hot here in Napa at 110 degrees.
And is this available only at online or at the winery?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So at 400 cases, it's kind of it's not going out very far. So,
No.
and this is, I'm going to show it on the black label on the Oak Knoll. This is, oh, maybe it was better on the white one. This is the winery itself on the label.
Yeah, so that's the entrance to our caves. It kind of looks like the Garden of Babylon. It's got all this Boston ivy or Japanese grapevine all over the front. And I think it is just so attractive. If you're coming to Napa, come and have a look in the next, I would say, next week or so. Given it's October, it should be just stunning. For probably the next 2 or 3 weeks after that. So yeah, for the month of October, it's quite the scene for Halloween.
Oh, yes. And did I forget anything? Merlot wise, Rutherford Hill wise? This is your opportunity to shout out to the world something I forgot.
No, I think you pretty much nailed it. I really like your summations on Saunier, which I should have probably touched on a bit better, and I think you really closed it out well. I think Rutherford Hill is coming back with a vengeance in terms of what we're doing with Merlot, so I'm excited to see what people think.
And as you said earlier, right, Rutherford Hill is on a mission to make Merlot great again.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. You had me at Merlot, as I say, as well. So, yep, Merlot all the way.
And how can they get to you? How do visitors come visit Rutherford Hill?
Yeah, so we accept walk-ins. It's probably best just to ring ahead. But yeah, the best thing is to find Rutherford, and then you'll see us on the hill.
And can they get in that cave?
Yeah, you can just ask the right people at the tasting room, for sure. If we're in the middle of processing, people might in our area might be concerned for people's safety, but generally, I think we kind of the best way is to make sure we at the tasting room know you're coming. So
And
yeah,
what
if you've got our website, it clearly says as well the best ways to go about it. But if it's ad hoc like I tend to do, yeah.
And what can somebody expect when they walk into the tasting room? Are there, and this is a bad question to ask a winemaker, so if you don't know it, I completely understand. Like, are there multiple flights they can choose from? Is there any elevated experiences, anything like that?
Yeah, so we have an ATV tour. We have quite the assortment of things we offer. Also, you got to look out for a rogue winemaker that doesn't like seeing empty glasses and generally has a bottle of wine that tops of any empty area, any empty wines. And then we have a picnic area which is grandfathered in, very unique to Napa Valley. And yeah, we got some views that are just spectacular. So yeah, you could come up to the picnic area as well and enjoy a bottle of wine and some snacks of your choosing.
Wonderful. And they can find Rutherford Hill on Instagram at Rutherford Hill Winery, X Rutherford Hill, and Facebook at Rutherford Hill Winery. And I want to thank you, Michael, for coming on and sharing your passion of Merlot and introducing my listeners and followers to Rutherford Hill. And I got to tell you, this Napa Valley Merlot is spectacular. and I cannot wait to taste through the rest of them. And that all will be on my social media as we get further into Merlot Me Month.
Yeah, I love that. And Laurie, I cannot say thank you enough. Your passion is fantastic. And yeah, I hope that it's more than a tasting, if you know what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. And so
Not going to drink itself.
I actually had to contain myself because I always like to have a little bit left to, cheers off. And I just was drinking and drinking, and I had to say, "Oh, wait, I'm going to be out of my glass if I continue to enjoy it at this moment." But right now, I just want to raise a glass and say thank you
Cheers.
very much and say slancha.
Thank you. Cheers.